Hey guys, welcome to today's episode. Today we're going to be taking a look at this 2007 Honda CRF250R. Hard starting. Old owner said that it was recently rebuilt, but it loses compression and won't start. So we're going to open this engine up, check the valve clearances. We're going to do a leak down test and a couple of other things. Get this thing running well and back on the road. Welcome to Restorooster OHV. So what we've got going on this bike is an occasional no start condition due to low compression. The bike will not start now. Of course, it's been sitting for a couple of months. I haven't had a chance really to get to it. More than likely they use ethanol fuel. So part of this video, we're going to go ahead and get into this carburetor, go through it, clean it. Also want to get in here and measure my valve clearances. Also want to check to make sure that the timing is correct. Not going to bother doing a compression test. It's very difficult with a decompression on these to get a good compression test. What we are going to do is what they call a cylinder leak down test. And to do this, some things we're going to want to take apart. Obviously we're looking for air leaks from the cylinder, whether it be through the intake valves, the exhaust valves, which you'd hear air coming out of your intake or your exhaust. So we need to get the air box off and get the muffler off at least. We also want to take off the radiator cap. If we see any bubbles coming up through that, that could definitely be a head gasket issue. We're also going to take the cylinder head cover off, take off the timing mark plug, and we're going to listen for air coming out of those areas, which would technically mean that there's a possibility that the rings are worn. Although, like I said, this bike feels like it's got a ton of compression. So without further ado, I'm going to start taking this bike apart. It always helps to put the bolts back where you got them from. You took them out from. This way you're not searching around for bolts and you're putting it back together. Now, while taking the rear shock off is not 100% necessary, it'll certainly give me more access. Right, Callie? Sometimes your best bet is to disconnect the hot start cable from the lever and pull the whole assembly out. As it can be very difficult to get it unscrewed from the carburetor while in the bike. First thing I'm going to do, pull the spark plug. Next step, we're going to want to get this on top dead center. So you got to come over on the right side, remove the crankshaft nut cap, get a hex key in there. Now we're going to rotate the crankshaft clockwise. Going to slowly look in and wait for the timing mark. So if you see that, that's number one. You want to go to the second one. Line it up dead even with the window. Now you know you're on top dead center. Make sure your camshaft timing is correct as follows. There they are, lined up with the cylinder head. So on our intake clearance, book specification is 0.12 millimeter plus or minus 0.03 millimeter. So technically we can go 0.09 to 0.15. Anywhere in that range millimeters, we're okay. So I don't have a 0.12, I have a 0.13. Where I need to go is between the intake camshaft lobe and the tappet underneath. You can slide that right in. That slides in fine. It will not go in on this side. So we'll try our next smallest one. Next smallest one is 0.10 millimeter. And that does slide in. So we are within spec on the intake. Now we'll do the exhaust. Now the clearance for the exhaust side is 0.28 millimeters, plus or minus 0.03. So that gives us a range of 0.25 to 0.31 millimeters. I'm going to start off mid-range with a 0.28, and we're going to try and get right in here. That is very tight. That one slides nice. Okay, that one slides good as well. They're actually right in spec. All right, so before we go any further, let me clarify what a cylinder leakage or leak down test is and how it works. So basically we have to use a gauge setup like this. This one is made by OTC. You have an inlet air pressure and an outlet air pressure. We're going to pressurize the gauge set using a standard shop air hose. This hose comes out and it will actually go down inside of your cylinder where the spark plug goes. The reason we do a leak down test is it tells a lot about the condition or the health of the engine. By pressurizing the cylinder and we hear air escaping, we sort of know the condition of what's going on with the motor. I don't care if you got a brand new engine, you're going to have some leak down. It's going to always escape past the rings. What we don't want is we don't want any air escaping through the intake valve, the exhaust valve, or through the cooling system. Those are going to be serious issues that are going to need to be looked into. And typically, if we're under 15% leakage, we're in pretty good shape and really wouldn't require any kind of repairs at that point. When you start getting up around 40%, you're going to be looking at an engine overhaul. So how we do this is we will slowly increase the air pressure, and I'm going to try to get up as close as I can to 100 psi, and the secondary gauge will show the difference in the leak down, and also we'll be able to listen and hear air escaping. If we hear air escaping through our crankcase, that's going to be normal, and that means that it's escaping past the rings. If we hear air escaping through our intake, that means we got an intake valve that's not sealing properly. The seats are bad, the valve's bad, or something along that nature. It could even potentially be a crack in the head. Same thing with the exhaust. If we hear air coming out of the exhaust, valve seat, crack somewhere in the head, potentially. If we see air bubbles, or if there's no coolant in the radiator and we hear air or see air bubbles, that's going to be more than likely a head gasket is bad, or a crack in the head or the cylinder. So let me finish hooking this up and I'll walk you through doing the test. So the stipulations for performing this test is you definitely want your piston on top dead center on the compression stroke. We're already there after checking the valves. We got to make sure it doesn't move. Now there's a couple of ways to do this. And pressurizing the cylinder to 100 psi, she's going to want to kick. She's going to want to turn the engine over. So we have to lock it down good. One way to do that is to put a breaker bar and a socket on the flywheel. On this particular bike, it would actually be on the passenger side where we had the socket to turn the engine over. This is not recommended, probably a last resort deal, because if this thing does spin, it's going to want to spin that wrench and it could be dangerous. So the easier way to do this is going to you put your bike in top gear, as long as your clutch is good. Put it in high gear, 5th gear, 6th gear, whatever you got, 4th gear, and you're going to hold the rear brake as you add pressure, and this should keep the engine from turning. Definitely want to take your wrench out of the crankshaft. In case it does spin, it doesn't roll up and smash your teeth all out. It's not a good look and probably not worth it. I've got the bike at high gear, holding the brake real tight. We're going to start adding a little bit of air pressure to this. Okay, so we're at 50 psi on our input gauge. I don't really need to go any higher at this point because I'm showing like 34 psi on my output side. I hear this thing has an exhaust leak. It has an exhaust valve that's not seating properly. This type of a leak will never show up in a compression test. So after doing a cylinder leak down test, which pressurizes the combustion chamber and the exhaust valve leak, now with the pressure off of it, I've remeasured my valve clearance on my exhaust, and I've actually lost quite a bit. I've got 0.15 millimeter now, which is actually half of the spec that it needs to be. So there's an issue with the exhaust valves on this. At this point now, I'm going to go ahead and pull the cylinder head off. I'm going to pull the valves apart and see if we can see anything. All right, I got the head off. Camshaft looks real good. Bearings are nice. I did find a loose nut in there. I don't think it's the problem, but I don't know if you call that acorn or what. So it actually doesn't look too bad. Looks like it's running a little bit rich. But I'm going to go ahead and pop these exhaust valves out. I'm going to take a look at these seats and the valve faces. These are the shims. My magnet here. On top of the valve. That is sticking just slightly. She goes. That's probably part of the problem here. Little keepers, collets, they call them. They call it collets. That's what holds the valve in. I think what I got going on here, see if I can figure out a way to show this. These valves, what happens is they are flat to a certain angle against the stem, perpendicular. As this thing keeps slamming against the seat, what happens is this whole part of the valve will start to bow like this, which brings the shaft of the valve higher and higher up inside the head. So to keep your clearances, you have to put smaller and smaller shims. This one's sticking too. When you tighten this, that should push right down super easy. And it's really getting hung up. I'm feeling tension, so I got to give her a little tap with a hammer and she'll break free. While I've got a little downtime, let me go ahead and get this carburetor apart. This is an FCR carburetor. And what I want to do, first when we take our low speed screw out, this bike ran pretty good, so I'm going to count the turns in so I know where to put it back to. It'll save me a little bit of time in the tuning. About 2.5. So behind here there's a spring, there's a washer, sometimes they don't all come out, and then there's an O-ring. I have a little small piece of metal with a tiny hook bent on the end that helps get these out. Here's your washer and your O-ring. Easy to lose. Go ahead and take our hot start cable out. And we'll pull the bowl. Pull the bowl. Come on, buddy. So she's pretty clean. I can't complain. I like it. Regardless, I'm going to pull all the jets out, blow through them, spray some super juice through, see how we do. So if you don't have the right size wrench, you want to just grab a pair of pliers and just grab this thing and just mow it right out of there. But if you do want to have the right size, it's a 6mm for the main jet. Below it is an 8mm. Then we want to go ahead and get our choke jet out and our low speed jet. Some crazy people call it a pilot jet. Pilot and jet. Fighting me tooth and nail. Wow, that's actually clear. This thing's really clean. Next we're going to spray some cleaner through all these passageways. But go ahead and get yourself some of this Motorcraft Spray Carburetor Tune-Up Cleaner. It is a PM2. It's worth the hide and seek, guys. This stuff is amazing. It's a really good cleaner. Short straw on it. And where we're going to blow through, a couple of things. Now there's a little brass, for lack of a better term, penice sticking up over here. That's your accelerator pump jet. That's going to go to this little hole right here. I'm going to put it there and spray through. You want to see a good flow through there. This big one here obviously is going to be your fuel inlet. Of course, you're going to spray a little out there. It won't hurt anything. Next one down here is going to be for your choke. This main opening with the needle, that's for your main jet. That generally won't have anything that'll clog when you have all those other pieces out. Next one here, this is for your pilot circuit. Just spray in there. Now you're going to see this thing come out from a couple of different spots. So when you spray through here, it should come out where your pilot adjustment screw is. Should come out a little hole right there. And also in the back here. So we can actually spray through the back. See how that's coming out? A little bit of green stuff. And it's coming out there. This carb's actually pretty clean, but it's still got some stuff coming out. And we'll spray up in here, and that should come right out that hole. So, and give it an overall rinse down, let it soak, blow through everything with air, you're good to go. Now, if these jets, and a lot of times when these bikes sit, people use ethanol fuel, these things will be clogged. Now, this is your pilot jet, okay? The number is either going to be stamped on the side or on the top. Don't even bother trying to look at that through the camera. You're going to need a magnifying glass to see that. At least I do. So, got my glasses on here. See what this one says. Looks like it's a 58.
And this is going to be your low speed, so your idle circuit and right off of idle. So the hole in this thing is tiny, tiny, tiny down inside there. If these sit any particular amount of time, they will block up. And this is why your bike will not idle most of the time. So if you can clean all this out real good, blow air through everything and everything's flowing, you're going to want to try to blow through this. And again, you can go ahead and take your spray and spray. This one's good. It's blowing right through. But if it does not come out, you're going to have to soak this in this stuff. Get yourself an ultrasonic cleaner, super cheap, Harbor Freight. Throw it in there with this. Now the PM3, I believe, is the liquid. You can just pour it right into there. And it takes a lot of time off of it as far as cleaning. And just keep blowing through it until it's clear. Or go ahead and replace this pilot jet. And the same thing with your main jet. These don't generally block up too bad, but the number will be stamped on there somewhere. It looks like 190. I'm gonna have to hire somebody to come and read that for me, but these are blowing through fine. So I'm gonna just go ahead and blow the carburetor out real quick with compressed air, and we're going to set the float and put her back together. Now when you're blowing through these, you want to hold them tight because they go, and sometimes you can never find them again. They go where the socks go when you do the laundry. You just don't find them. Now, I forgot to mention there's actually two other circuits in here that you're going to want to blow out. That's going to be your choke and your hot start. Just go easy on them. Don't crank them down. Snap them right off. Check your float. Rarely find problems with these. The old metal ones, they would have issues. But you want to shake them. If you hear any gas inside of them, you got to get a new one. They won't float if they're full of gas. Take a look at your needle and seat. I'm not having any kind of issues with that, so I'm not really technically doing a carb rebuild. I'm just doing a carb refresh. So I just went ahead and looked up the specs for the float, which is 6mm or 1/4 inch. But the main and the pilot jet on this thing are way off from stock. And why, I don't know. I'm going to put them back to stock and see how it runs. If not, we'll adjust the jetting from there. But the way we want to adjust the float is this float should actually be just sitting right on the needle, but not pressing down on it. And you want to measure from the base to this corner. So it should be about 6mm. The way you adjust it would be to bend that little metal tab to get your spec where it needs to be. Stock jetting is 42 on the pilot, 175 on the main. We'll put those back in and see how she runs. May have to do some tuning after that, because you just don't know what the last guy did. Like the last guy could have been me working on it. This thing will be a mess. Let's get our pilot adjustment needle back in. Check it, make sure it's not bent, the tip's not broken off. Sometimes when they over tighten these in, this little tip on the end can actually break off and get stuck in the carburetor. You got yourself a world of hurt there. It's probably going to be carburetor replacement time. So this will go on, your spring will go on, then your metal washer and your O-ring. I'm going to go ahead and replace this O-ring. Put your metal washer on, new O-ring. Now this thing was 2.5 turns out with a, what was it, 68 pilot jet. That don't make any sense. So start at 1 3/4 turns out. This plastic nut is very easy to cross thread. You gotta be careful putting it back together. That's why it's easier to do it on the bench. They do sell some of these on the auction website that are CNC machined, and they actually work really well, and they're fairly inexpensive. So That's it. Get it tightened back up. Get your boot back on. Make sure she works. That's it. We're ready to reinstall this carburetor someday down the road. All right, it's been a couple days. Got a couple of new steel valves I put in, lapped in, and reinstalled. I'm going to redo the cylinder leak down test and see if we're in any better condition. I made it to 50 last time. Sounds good. We do have a little bit of leakage past the rings. Totally normal. Oh, I can feel that rear wheel torquing. All right, let's give this another shot. I'll take it up to about 90. So I've got 90 psi on my inlet gauge, and I have 88, so that's absolutely fantastic. Heads back together. I'm rechecking my valve clearances, and although the intake seemed to be okay, taking the tappets out and the shims out has changed that measurement a little bit. So let's do this in millimeter here. 0.12 plus or minus 0.03 millimeter is the range that we want to be in. So that will put us at 0.09 to 0.15 is where we need to be. Where we're at is at 0.20. So we are out of this spec. So being that we're at 0.20 millimeters and we want to get in this range for the intake, and the shims are 0.05 increments, all we need to do is go up one shim size larger, and that will get us where we need to be. Now these shims, they're tiny. Sometimes they'll have writing on them to tell what size they are, and it makes it easy to go up, but unfortunately this one does not, so it's worn off. So we'll go ahead and take a measurement here. So I got about 2 millimeter. This thing is not the most accurate thing in the world for sure, but got about 2 millimeters. So what we're going to do is go to a 2.05. So a little bit thicker. We're going to go put that in and then remeasure our valves. Okay, this one turned out to be too big. A lot of this is a lot of trial and error, especially if you can't read the other shim. But I'm going to go with a 2.0. And we'll try that. Now when you're doing this on this Honda, the buckets are underneath here, and you got to keep taking them out constantly. So every time you put this thing back together, you don't have to set your timing chain, timing mark. I would set your timing marks up pretty much where they belong, but you don't have to put your chain on or anything like that. It's not going to make any difference. But you will need to put your caps back on and get those torqued. Ten slides really easy. My next size up is 0.13. And that has just slight drag. So that is ideal. Our intake side is shimmed. Now you can go ahead and get your camshaft back off, get your timing chain back on, get everything timed properly, and then we'll do the exhaust side. Honda actually did a great design with this compared to Yamaha, Suzuki, or Kawasaki. Now, you don't even have to pull the cam or disturb the timing to do this. For the exhaust valves, it's actually pretty amazing setup. You do have to take out the 2 front bolts on your cam caps. There's a bolt on the right hand side, or a little cap cover. You take that out, and then you go in there with a screw, which is the proper threads, and you'll actually just thread it into to get it to catch on this rod, and you pull that rod out. And now you can actually reach in. I don't know if I can reach in without blocking the camera. You can slide your rocker arm up and out, change your shims, and then slide it right back together. Super simple. Get your pin back in, remeasure. If you're good, retorque your cam cap bolts, and you're good to put the engine back together. Well, I finally got the bike all back together. What a ordeal this has been, just getting some parts. I'm gonna tell you a little quick story here before I let you go. I ordered the parts from Rocky Mountain ATV. They were shipped by FedEx. They were left in my mailbox by FedEx, and my USPS driver took the package. So basically, USPS is saying it's illegal for FedEx to put it in the mailbox. FedEx won't talk to me because I'm not the shipper. And Rocky Mountain ATV is basically saying they're not liable because USPS took it and that's theft. So you guys down in the comments, right, who you think is right and who you think is wrong on this. Unfortunately, I'm the only guy here that's bent over and having trouble with the situation. So other than that, Rocky Mountain's really been good to me, and I hate to blame it on them, but it's just going to be one of those things, you know what I mean? So I appreciate you guys watching. If you got any questions or comments, please leave them down there in the comments section. Appreciate a thumbs up, a like, a subscribe, and thanks for watching. Always appreciate it. See you next time.